and run the game, when we collide with an object, it should remove it and it should increment. So in this tutorial, we are going to go over making a start to a 2D game. We are going to go through some basic input in Unity. We're going to go through basic collisions, 2D Unity physics, just basic, okay. And yeah, so let's get started. So I'm in the Unity Hub. I'm going to click on a new project, okay, and I'm going to name this a collector, okay, because we are also going to be going through collecting and picking up items with our collision system, okay. So I'm going to set the template to 2D. Unity version doesn't really matter, okay. I'm in 2019, and Unity and analytics, turn that off, because for my purpose I don't want to be making use of any of Unity's analytics, but you can if you would like to, okay. Alrighty, so when you first open Unity, it looks a little scary. There are lots of different tabs, lots of different sections. Firstly, we have the hierarchy here. So this is where all of your game objects will be going. At the start, we have a main camera, okay, and we have a directional light. Now, I thought I set this to 2D, maybe not, but I'm just gonna do solid color, okay. And now, firstly, if we go over to layout up the top, there are a bunch of different choices that you may choose. This is what it looks like by default when you open up Unity. For my purpose, I like using 2x3. Okay. Now we have an assets folder over here, and this is in our project tab. So we can create a variety of things by clicking on right click, okay. Just anywhere. Go create folder, C# script, shaders. There's a lot of cool things that you can make use of here. So we also have the scene. So this is how we move around and edit our game objects and make it look good for the gameplay, okay. So now we are going to create a sprite. So if I go over into assets and create and sprites, then there are a variety of sprites that I can choose from. I'm going to keep it simple and use a square, okay. And I'm just going to call it square. Perfect. So now I can right click in my hierarchy and create empty, okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is there's a little settings cog here, and I'm just going to reset all the components so it's back at 0, okay. Now I'm going to name this player because it is our player, okay. I'm going to give it a tag of player as well, and I'm going to add a component, a sprite renderer, okay. Now this will allow us to have our sprite of our square in our game. Pretty cool. So now what we also need is to make use of Unity's physics system and collision system. So we're going to add a rigid body 2D, okay? And in our case, there are a lot of settings that we can play with, but I'm going to grab gravity scale and set it to 0 because we're going to be moving up and down. But if you would like gravity in your game, feel free to do that. Now I'm also going to add a box collider 2D with that, okay? So if we zoom in and have a look now, we should have a box collider, the green little line. It's a bit hard to see, but it is pretty good. Alright. So now that we have our player, we need to make our player move. and we're going to make it move simply by creating a script for it. Okay, so I'm going to click create and then C# script. I'm going to call this one player controller. Okay, now if we double click on it and open up Visual Studio, let it load up, it should come up with some pre-set up code for us. Okay, so in our case, we don't need using system.collections and system.collections.generic, okay? But we do want to use Unity Engine because we want to make use of the code that Unity has created for us. So what we're first going to do is define some variables. Now I'm going to press enter a few times just to space it out nicely. And I'm going to add a public float speed, okay? And I'm going to put a semicolon at the end. Now, a float is a number that has up to 7 decimal places, I believe. And we want it to be public because we want to access it in different places, okay? Now, as well as that, we also need to define our rigid body, okay? So I'm going to go rigid body 2D, and I'm going to call it rigid body, okay? Now, in the start method, okay, the start is called before the first frame update. So it'll allow us to initialize and define some variables if we would like to. Now, we've already initialized, we have already initialized our rigid body, but in the start method, we want to actually set it equal to something because right now it's not equal to anything. So I'm going to set rigid body equal to get component with some open and closing arrows, okay, and I'm going to type in rigid body 2D, and at the end I'm going to put open and close bracket and a semicolon. Now this is going to find the rigid body 2D that we have already added to our player, and it's going to set it equal to this variable so it's easily referenced in the future, okay? Now we're going to head over to our update function, okay, our method, and this is called once per frame. Now every frame, what we want to do is we need to check for input, and if we get input then we may move, okay? So we're going to make use of Unity's input system by firstly defining an X and Y variable for our horizontal and vertical movement. So I'm going to define a float, and this is going to be called horizontal, okay? And I'm going to set this equal to input dot get axis, an open bracket. I'm going to type in horizontal, okay? And I'm going to put a semicolon. I'm also going to type in float vertical, okay? And set that equal to input dot get axis vertical with a semicolon. So this inside these two quotation marks, okay, is a string. So string is any variety of characters, okay? And by getting the axis, it's getting the axis name, and it's going to find the horizontal axis, so anything that correlates to that in Unity, which we can edit in our settings if we like. But for now, we're just going to leave it as is because it's pretty general and pretty useful as is. So I'm going to go over now, and I'm going to check whether we're getting an input. So, sorry, we've already checked whether we're getting an input technically. And we're going to apply that to our rigid body. So I'm going to type in rigid body, and I'm going to do dot velocity. So we're going to find the velocity inside of our rigid body, and we're going to set it to a new vector 3. Okay. Now a vector 3 can take in nothing, can take in an x and y variable or an x, y, and z variable, which will control its movement on the x, y, and z axis. Okay. So firstly, I want to grab horizontal, and I'm going to multiply this by speed. Okay. And that is going to make us move relative to the speed. Okay. Now I'm also going to get my vertical axis for the y, and I'm going to times that by speed as well. Okay. And for the float z, I'm going to set it to 0 because we don't actually want to be moving. This is a 2D game. We don't want to be moving forwards and backwards. So with that, we should be done. So make sure you save your code, go back into Unity, and before we can hit play or do anything, we must go to the player. Okay. And we need to add this script in. So if you just drag it in on the right, perfect. And we need to set our speed. Our speed, I'm going to set to 5. It's generally pretty good. Now if you click play, you press the left, right, up and down, perfect. You can notice that you may also press the WASD keys because they are also defined in the horizontal and vertical axes. So now that we are moving, we want to be able to add some collectibles to our game. So we want to be able to show off the collision system inside of Unity. So I'm going to add a new empty object, and I'm going to call this item. Okay, and I'm going to reset the components values. Okay, and I'm going to add firstly a sprite renderer. Okay, and I'm just going to quickly create a circular sprite. Okay, circle, perfect. And I'm going to drag that in. So we got a circle. We can drag that over. I'm going to set the scale to 0.5 by 0.5, so it's a little bit smaller. Okay. Perfect. And now I'm going to add a circle collider 2D. So if we have a look, it should perfectly align a circle around it, which is pretty good. So I can press Ctrl D a few times, and that will allow me to grab and drag multiple items around the scene. So we can collect multiple. Okay. Now we need to set our collider to isTrigger because we want to make sure we are using a trigger in our collision type. So if we press play now and we go over, it's not actually going to collect it. Okay, we're going to be able to hit it and spin around because it has a circle collider. Okay, but we also need to add it for all of them, so we need to set it to a trigger. Perfect. So now we need to add another script, and this C# script is going to be called collection controller. Okay. Now I'm going to open up this. Alright, and in here we want to be collecting our items. So we need to create a new method. So this is going to be void on trigger enter 2D. Okay. Now it takes in the collider, and that's going to be the collision. Okay. Now we're going to check if the collider tag is a player. So if a player collides with us, then we will be able to destroy ourselves. Okay. So I'm going to type if collision dot tag is equal to, equal to player in a string, okay? Now if it is, then what do we want to do? We want to destroy this game object, okay? So destroy game object, I'm going to destroy ourselves, and that's that. But we probably want to be able to keep some sort of score as well. So in our player controller, we can also add a using Unity engine.ui with a semicolon, okay? And that will allow us to define a public text. And I'm just going to call this collected text, okay? And in our update function, we can simply type in collected text.text is going to equal to a string, so items collected, okay? And we also want the amount that it has collected, so collected amount, okay? But we haven't defined this variable, so we need to go back up here and we need to do a public static integer, okay? And I'm going to call it collected amount. Now if we save that and go back into our collection controller, we can also, just before we destroy our game object, we can also set the player controller dot collected amount, and we're going to increment it, okay? So every time we collect an item, it's going to go up, and every frame it's going to update based on the collected amount. So if we go back into Unity and we click on all of our items by clicking on one, holding shift, we can click on the rest of them. Now we can add a component, collection controller, okay? Perfect, but there's a problem. We don't actually have a text. So what we need to do is we need to right click, and we're going to go to UI and text. So this is going to create a canvas for us, and we can't actually see our text. So we're going to have to set it to 0, 0. Now we have our text in the center of the screen. If we anchor it by clicking here and holding shift, okay, we can even hold Alt, put it straight up. It is stuck to the top, okay. Now we can also center our text and we can change it. So collected amount 0, okay. Now we also need to set this equal to 0 at the start, otherwise it is not going to be defined. So we set that to 0, and now if we go to the player and drag our text into our collected text and run the game, when we collide with an object, it should remove it and it should increment. So if we go to another one, perfect, perfect. So I hope this was educational. I hope you're able to get something out of it. If you did, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down, okay? Yeah, I hope this gets your brains rattling with ideas for the future. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy.